In our time together on this podcast, we've had guests from all walks of life, fighting a plethora of life's battles and how God has used them to matter in His kingdom through it all. You might never have a life-threatening illness, overcome an addiction, or end up the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So how does this idea that you matter translate to you? How do we truly make the everyday life matter too? Several years ago, many at this point, I wrote a book, Making Life Matter, on the principle that in a world of fast-paced schedules and priorities, conversations about the things that make for a life well lived are a rarity and a luxury. But what if the daily pace of life held in itself the way to make choices more significant? What if the daily to-do list gave a glimpse into how people might change their future? What if the daily grind, as arduous as it might seem, held the key to a life full of meaning and potential? What if every day, simple steps, instead of some complex list of seemingly unattainable principles, showed how to make life matter? In several parts, with guests in between, we are going to look at what it means to make your life matter to God's kingdom, with scripture to back it all up, of course, and how to embrace the small joys in every day. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey friends, welcome to the You Matter podcast. I'm Shane Stanford. On today's podcast, I'm going to talk to you about a little book I wrote several years ago that had a lot of personal meaning for me, and I believe has some potential wise direction for your life. And I know that in a world that seems so divided and there's so much confusion, where can we really hang our hat? And of course, we believe here at the JourneyWise Network and You Matter podcast that you hang your hat walking with Jesus. The purpose of the book was that we were to have an understanding of not only what it means to have wisdom, but those relationships that God sends to you that intersect into your life that give you Jesus wisdom. And that's what this book was really about, primarily about conversations I'd had with my grandfather. And the name comes directly from a very important conversation that I had with my grandfather when I was just 16, 17 years old. I'm a hemophiliac, and I'd been newly diagnosed with HIV. And it was during the time where there were no medicine. People were being, kicked out of school. There were people's houses were being burned because neighborhoods didn't want them to live in their neighborhoods. And so it was a pretty tough time. And to be given that diagnosis at such a young age, there's a lot that happens in your heart and your soul. And you begin to look for direction because I know a lot of my friends who did not have a very strong faith center ended up going in directions that were not healthy for them. As I was thinking about what it meant for us to be faithful to my faith, I wanted to be a good witness, even in the midst of something that felt so tragic. And I did have people that would say to me, hey, why do you think God did this to you? I had one friend who came from a very fundamentalist background that said, that your parents or your grandparents or someone in your line did something so tragic that this is the punishment that God's giving for that. And I used to think, well, my goodness, God could have picked on someone else. But that's the way a lot of people thought. And they thought, of course, that if you had this diagnosis of HIV, that no matter what happened or how you got this diagnosis, that, of course, there was some sin that was in your life. It couldn't be just about the brokenness of the human body and, of course, our conditions. And so I was looking for wisdom, and my grandfather was my hero. He was a very special, important man to me, and I looked to him for a lot of reasons. Now, something that many people do not know is that my grandfather was not told immediately by my family. In fact, they held it from him because they felt that it would be too much stress on him. And so we went for some time without my grandfather knowing about my diagnosis. And I was being told, you can't tell this person about this because this may harm them. And I felt this is a guy that I would go to for any basic conversations. I went to him about not only how to play golf, but I went to him about how to deal with friends. I went to him about when I started dating. I mean, this is a guy that gave me so much advice. And I'm not sure all of it was very good advice, but I trusted him. and to not be able to go to him. And he could tell something was wrong. And we had played, I think, a round of golf that morning. And there was a place on the golf course because my family ran the golf course. And there was a place on the golf course where my grandfather and I would go and sit, and he would bring out fresh peaches if it was in season, or maybe some other fruit when it wasn't. And we would just sit there and talk about things. And he said, "What's going on?" And this was a man that you did not lie to. He did not take kindly to not being told the truth. I did it one time. My three cousins, first cousins, and I got into trouble, and we lied to our grandfather. And of course, it took a while for us to piece that back together. And it was over something so silly. That's a whole other story. But as I began to talk to him, I said, "Well, the medicines used to treat my hemophilia are contaminated with HIV. And, I've been given maybe 2 healthy years before before I will develop into full blown AIDS." And I remember he looked, and it was almost like he knew what was happening. And I think possibly that he had heard and had kind of just put it together. He was a really smart, wise man, uh, only had half of a college education, then had to go to work, went to war. But you could tell this was a man who understood when the crossroads of life were getting difficult. And he said, "So what are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Well, there's not really anything I can do with it except have to live it." And he said, "Well, no, you do have a choice." And I didn't know where this was going. And I kind of thought, well, I wonder what he's meaning by this. And I said, "What choice do I have?" And he said, "Well, you can get in the corner of life and you can feel sorry for yourself." And he said, "And I love you so much, I'll get in the corner with you. You will not have to do it alone." But he said, "I think you're going to make something more. I think you're going to make life matter." And he said, "That's what you've got to do, is take each day as a gift and make the most out of it that you can." And my grandfather was a person that I went to for such wisdom. And for him to say this to me, to say, "Look, you do have a choice, even in something that is at the time seems absolutely so hopeless." I can't convey that strong enough. And I don't think in all the times that I've told this story over the last 25, 30 years, that I conveyed enough of what that meant, that this was a death sentence in so many ways. And it wasn't a death sentence that was easy, because it came with a lot of social issues and social pressures. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, I don't have to take it 3 and 4 years in the future. I can take it one day at a time, and what I can make of this day. And that's one of the things I want you to understand that are listening, is that you don't have to take life months and years at a time. You take it one day at a time. You take it one moment at a time. And that is a very special thing, is being able to know that you have the ability to address everything, to be present with things. I have faced difficult situations in my life before where I just felt so overwhelmed. They seemed so big. But at the end of the day, they're a crossroads, and you make a decision and you try to make the best decision possible, and then you move forward and go on. And so I encourage you, as you're thinking about life, that's really one of the first principles that I want you to understand, is to make sure that you're taking life one breath at a time, making sure that you're taking it one intersection at a time, one issue at a time. And I know that's so hard. That's easier said than done. But the reason we get ourselves into that, I've discovered, is because we really are not fully present at those intersections of our life. We don't approach a lot of our circumstances with our full attention. We get so scattered and so caught off guard because there is so much that we are dealing with. So as I thought about that, I went on throughout my life, and that making life matter. I wanted to make each day matter. And so it became a very important part of my ministry. The book came out about 10 years, I would say, after my grandfather died. And it was because I had found some journals of my grandfather. And in those journals, he had these sayings that were written. And I picked 6 of the sayings. But what I wanted to do with you today is talk about the 3 that I think are the most important. And they are three sayings that I have pinned to my office wall. In fact, this is the piece of paper that gets pinned to my office wall, and it reminds me of these three that I think are so important, and I've used them so much during my ministry. The first one is my grandfather used to say, "I am how I pray." And when I was younger, I thought maybe he was confused, or I had no idea what he was talking about because the sentence is awkward. But as you listen to it, you slow down and listen to it, you really do see what he's talking about. I am how I pray. On days that I'm going through difficulties, on days that I'm going through struggles, on days that I'm going through trying to make good decisions, I've realized over my old age now that I am no more capable of dealing with that circumstance than I am how I have prayed for that day. John Maxwell, the great leadership person, used to say that it's called the cap. That you can't try to you can't try to lead a team to a 10 if all your people working on your team are sevens. There is the law of the lid, and there's a line there. Well, it's very similar to our prayer life. I tell people that you are how you pray, and therefore, if you're not praying, then you're going to face situations feeling like the world is collapsing, like you don't know the direction, like you don't know what God would do, and particularly you don't know what Jesus would do, because prayer goes along with your devotional life. It goes along with your study life. In fact, a devotional life encompasses three things. It encompasses being present, it encompasses studying, and it encompasses praying. And therefore, I've at times done two of three of those very well, but I'll leave one out. And prayer usually is the one that gets left out because you enjoy studying, you enjoy reading, but really, are you spending time praying? And I want to ask you today, take a stock of your life. Are you how your prayer life is right now? And I'm not talking about, the times where we cry out to God, although I think those are valid prayers, crying out during crises and crying out during difficult moments. And I believe in that, and I want people to connect in that. But it's the everyday prayer life that prepares you for the moments when the crying out happens. I tell people all the time that in Philippians 4, Paul talks about two different kinds of peace. The first kind of peace is what I call triage peace. It's the peace that you get in that moment. And it is called the peace of God. And he says you have to do certain things for that. But it really is when the world is completely unraveled, but it's mainly for people who haven't been prepared. Because the second kind of peace he talks about is the God of peace. Don't you want to walk with the God of peace? And that's where he gives us that famous, think on these things. And he gives us those things that he encourages us to think on. There's a difference between walking with the God of peace and then needing the peace of God. The peace of God comes pretty naturally when you're walking with the God of peace. But when you're not walking with the God of peace, the peace of God can seem very difficult and very much out of hand and very much out of reach is what I meant. All right, the second lesson that I used to hear my grandfather say all the time was, they will walk like me. And he was a great example. He was a good man. He was a good husband, a good father, a great person in the community, had been the president of the Board of Education in that little community for 17 years, had been a businessman in that community, had just done a lot that was very much connected. He gave himself over to that. But I found out some things later in my grandfather's life that I would have never known. He was stoic, although he could laugh. But I did not know that he loved Gilda Radner. Now, many of you who are listening to this have no idea who that is. She was one of the first cast members of Saturday Night Live, and she was very good at impressions, but just over the top a lot of times. And I could not imagine that my grandfather liked Gilda Radner, but he loved her. And one of the stories that she told about her life in a biography that she wrote, 40 something years ago now, was that she had a little puppy that she had taken to it, and it had matured up to a grown dog, and that had no movement in its back legs, and so it would basically drag itself with its bottom hitting the ground everywhere it went. And she said, that's it was just pitiful to watch this. Well, lo and behold, this dog gets pregnant and has three little puppies, and she puts the little puppies, after they've nursed a bit and they're ready to run, she puts them out there with their mother. And she says she looks out the kitchen window and sees that there's the mom going along, dragging herself with her back end hitting the ground, and each of the three puppies were doing the same. Now, they had fully functioning four legs, but they were walking like their mother. And he loved that story because he felt like it really condensed and compressed what it meant to be a good example for your children. They're going to walk like you. And sometimes as that walk matures, they're going to emulate what you do, or they're going to push back on what you do. But how you walk is going to have profound effect on your children. But it doesn't just go to children either. As a church planter and as senior pastor of a couple of churches, I noticed that that's the way it happens in the family of God too. That's the way it happens with the way we do life, that people come to church very much like children. That's the example that Jesus gave. I think that's why he talked about children the way he did, because many of us as adults would come to church as children and also come as fully grown adults, but act like children in our lives. And therefore, we are looking for someone to walk like. Now, I will tell you now that after almost 37 years of having given my heart over to the vocation of ministry now, I believe that's why it is so important for us to walk with Jesus. That's why we've created our 360-day journey called Life Along the Way series. That's why we've put so much into helping people to find the places where they can really connect in that journey, because I think that is the person you're called to walk with. And I think that's the power of the incarnation. We think the incarnation was all about the cross and the resurrection, which it is, and it's important. But it's also about every mile that Jesus walked in between the birth and the passion. And it's about the idea that we are being taught, because he's fully human and fully God, we're being taught what it means to walk like this Jesus. And what a powerful thing that is. And so his frustrations and his levity and his sorrow and his joy, all of those things teach us something about how we walk. Who are you walking like? Now, this then translates itself over into how you deal with other people. And therefore, you become either a witness to what it means to walk with Jesus, or you become a witness to what it means to walk more with the world. I've had periods where I've been very much walking with Jesus. I've had periods where I've walked more with the world. What I want you to ask yourself is in order to make life matter, you have to understand the power of your witness. You have to understand the power, because I've seen people who would do nothing to draw closer to Jesus for themselves. But boy, when they had children and when their grandchildren came along, they wanted to change everything they were doing because they knew that there would be an imprint on those little ones. And I was always so thankful for little children, because that was one of the ways that generations who would go off to college and they would find themselves missing in church would find their way back to church, is when they would have children, because they knew that those kids would, in some way or another, they're going to walk like them, and they wanted to do something with it. So who's walking after you and like you, and how does that walk make not only for good things in the world, but how does it show them more and more the life of Jesus? Okay, third point. This is one that my grandfather did not say, but as I looked at his life and the witness of his life, and then as I've looked at the witness of my life, it is a saying that I actually said that I put in the book because it sounds so much like my grandfather and what he taught me. And that is, we are more than the sum of what we endure. And what I mean by that is, you're looking at a guy who has endured a lot. And not just in terms of my health, but I've had relational breakdowns. I've had, professional issues. And there's been a lot of endurance. I would say that everyone who will listen to this will have some sense of issues that they've endured. And a lot of times we allow those situations to define us. We allow those situations to become the driving force of our life. And so either we're working good because of them or we're working against them. We're doing one thing or the other. We're either working into them or we're working against them. And what I found is that at the end of the journey, a lot of people judge their life, the sum of their life, basically on what they've accumulated or what they've survived. Those are really the two markers: what they've accumulated or what they've survived, or maybe in the survival part, what they're not going to survive. I have had conversations with a couple of folks. One had a brain tumor, the other had pancreatic cancer, and they really could not see anything else good in their life except because of what they were dying with. And I do think part of that was regret. I've never met anyone on their deathbed, and I've been by too many deathbeds in my life, but I've never met anyone who said, "Man, I wish I would have worked more. Man, I wish I would have, gone to work 3 hours earlier." I've never met that person, but I have met people who said, "I wish I would have spent more time with my children." I had one gentleman who said, "I wish I would have spent more time with my children and played more golf." But you get to the end of the life and all of a sudden you begin to do a lot of math and you begin to try to figure out, have I invested myself faithfully? So what is the sum of my life? And I can tell you that every time I look at my children, every time this past Easter, my children were all different places. One was in Arkansas, one was in California, and one was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they were all doing Easter on their own. But I would get pictures of each of them, and I would think to myself, that's the formula in the math of my life right there. That is what I most want to be the sum of who Shane Stanford is, not just the books or the churches or the articles or whatever it might be. That stuff fades away, but what doesn't fade away is the imprint that you have on the people that you love most in the world. And I want you to ask yourself the question, so what's the math of your life? What's the formula of your life? Is the algorithm of your life about all the pain that then adds up to be, basically percentages of the things you've endured? Or when you add up your life, do you come to more than you possibly could have imagined? And that's really where I find myself in my life as my ministry is tending down, as I'm getting older, the first grandchild coming along. I really have been thinking a lot about what has it meant for me to have walked this earth. And those are not bad questions. A lot of people are like, well, I don't like to think about things like that. Well, I understand none of us like to think about it, but it happens. And we have the choice, just like my grandfather said 37, 8, 4, almost 40 years ago now. We have the choice to make each day count. We are writing the algorithm. We are writing the algorithm. And there are going to be bad parts of the code and good parts of the code. But at the end of the day, that code can be corrected, but it will summarize itself in some way. And so I encourage you, as you're thinking about your life, who are walking after you and what do they see? How are you praying? Does your prayer life equal the issues and struggles? Because there can be a deficit there, and that deficit is painful, friends, and it's difficult. And the question is do you summarize your life based on things that fade away, or does the math of your life come together on the things that pass way beyond your short time on this earth? I hope this has been helpful to you. Every day is an opportunity to make life matter. Every day, every moment. Even if you are not in some big circumstance or at an overwhelming crossroads, just a smile or a kindness or a word of encouragement, you can't imagine what that does to someone. I'll close by saying this. I've gotten into LinkedIn and, trying to build connections. And that's, I've never really been as big in that and have been bigger lately working in that because it's all about professional life. And so I was asked, this was a question by one of my new connections. They said, I see that you're a pastor. I see that you're over a Center for Applied Theology. Why don't you why don't you talk more about what your ministry is doing? I didn't post a lot for that. And I thought about it because I thought, oh my goodness, I have basically taken my faith and brought it out of what I do, my vocation. So as people are putting up there about selling tractors and trying to get investments, my vocation that I share is about Jesus. And so I've started posting, and I've tried to do it in a way that's very professional and very good in terms of the way people will receive it. And what I have found is that so many people, through the daily walk of their life and the daily expression of their work, have appreciated being reminded that all of it means something and can mean something for the totality of what we do. We are more than the sum of what we endure, and that's because Jesus has made us so. What a blessing. I love you. Take care of yourself. Be salt and light. You matter. God bless you.